morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you're at. My name is Gladys Rama. I'm the editorial director here at redmondmag.com and your moderator for today. Welcome to today's summit titled Azure and Your Digital Transformation, brought to you by the great folks at Software One and Microsoft. All of us editors here at redmondmag.com, along with our sponsors, Software One and Microsoft, have worked really hard to bring together some of the best experts on this topic for you. So thank you so much for attending today. We really appreciate it. And we have a great summit for you. Before we kick off the first of today's 3 sessions, however, we do have a couple of housekeeping announcements to go over. First, this event is being recorded, and it will be available for you to view in the future. So keep an eye out for that email from us when the replay is available. It'll usually come around the next couple of days. Second, each of today's 3 sessions will be followed by a short Q&A. So please be sure to put your questions into the Q&A area of your console as soon as they come up, and we'll get them answered for you. Even if we're not able to get to your question, if we happen to run out of time, don't worry, we're going to make sure that they get to the right presenter, the right panelist, and they'll be in touch with you to get you your questions answered. Next, today, during our 3rd session, we are giving away a Surface Pro 8, but you have to be present to win, so you'll want to stay on for the entire event to make sure that you're eligible. And at the end of that 3rd session, we will be asking you to take a quick survey with your opinions of this event. So please do share your honest opinions with us. I promise we read every comment. We take into account every recommendation, and they do help shape our future events. And finally, we have a bunch of resources from Software One and Microsoft that are available on the console for you right now. So please do download them, check them out, ask questions about them whenever you get a chance. It's because of Software One and Microsoft underwriting this content that we can bring you this summit. So I'd like to thank them for sponsoring today's event, supporting the community, and we ask that you check out those resources so we can bring you more events like this in the future. Now, on to the first session of today's summit. This one's called What's New and What's Hot in Azure in 50 Minutes, featuring Brett Hargreaves, Cloud Practice Lead at Iridium Consulting. Brett, take it away.
Hi, thanks for the introduction. It's great to be here speaking about Azure. It's one of my favorite subjects, and specifically when we start talking about what new stuff is available. So actually, when I was asked to talk about what's new in Azure, I wasn't quite sure what to talk about. And this is because there's just so much being released all the time. And it is one of the things that makes Azure great, because there's always something new, but it's also a bit tricky to try and keep up with it all. But anyway, for today's presentation, I decided to go and take some of the new areas that I'm personally excited about, and I tried to cover a few different aspects as well. So from application development through to operations, and even a bit of monitoring and security. So the first area I was going to talk about is Azure Container Apps. So the reason why I want to talk about Azure Container Apps is partly because I used to be a developer. And although these days I just generally do coding because I enjoy it and just to keep my hand in, but it's always still been quite a passion of mine. Now, to really understand the benefits that we get from the latest Azure Container Apps, it's handy sometimes to understand how applications actually developed over the recent years. And again, actually how it's changed through time is also quite a favourite subject of mine. And so I do find it handy just to briefly go through it. Apologies for any devs on there who already know all this. It will be quite brief. But it just helps give us a bit of background. So, way back in the day, apps used to be built in what's called a monolithic way. And basically, you used to build apps as one big lump on a mainframe computer. Now, as technology developed, applications started to break apart. So, for example, the first iteration with this was something called end-tier computing. So with end-tier computing, we started to break down software into layers or tiers. So the simplest might be, for example, is you would have a front-end user interface on one tier and a back-end database on the second tier. We then start to move into N tier, where you break those tiers down even more. So, for example, a three-tier application, you take a lot of the business logic and stick it in the middle between the front end and a back-end database. Then, of course, this works really, really well with web applications. And it was when cloud providers such as Azure came about that we could really start to break apart our apps even more into something called microservices. So these are discrete services that actually talk to each other to provide our entire solution. Now, it's also worth noting that in line with this new microservice architecture that was coming about, another technology was being developed called containerization. Now, containerization allows developers to define an environment that their software works on. And it also allows them to create smaller, fully contained environments. And this meant you could run far more of them on existing hardware. So the whole point of all this is that applications could now be built in small little bits, but built to scale easily to massive applications. Now, this in turn provided a new problem, which is how do you manage all of these different little microservices? How do you make them expand out, contract down, and so on? And so a technology came about called Kubernetes. So Kubernetes is a container orchestration service. And then what that basically means is it manages the creation, destruction, and general healthy management of containers that run your solution. So for example, as your solution needs to scale out, or as a microservice needs to scale out, the orchestrator adds more nodes and more computing power in as it's needed, and then when it's no longer needed, it manages scaling them back. It also monitors things like health, so if a container or a node becomes unhealthy, it can destroy it and replace it with a new healthy one. Now, Kubernetes also helps you manage lots of other aspects of microservices, such as providing routing between them, how they communicate with each other. And because of this, Kubernetes is generally split into two different areas. There's what's called the control plane. So this is the bit that does all this management and clever stuff. And then there's the nodes themselves that run your actual microservices or your actual solution. Now, Kubernetes is incredibly powerful and provides the ability to have very, very scalable and yet very secure applications. But this extra power comes with a lot more complexity, especially around when the management of these things. Now, more often than not, you will usually use additional services that go on top of your cluster as well. So, for example, you have things called ingress controls to manage the flow of traffic coming in to your service. You have service meshes to provide even more tight control around the cluster traffic and security and identity and so on. And then you've got obviously monitoring tools so that you can keep an eye on the health of your cluster. And within each of these areas, we've now got lots of different vendors. So although this amazing flexibility gives us fantastic choice, it does mean we need to make those choices, which can sometimes be a bit of a pain. So with my developer hat on, I really don't want to care about all that. I just want to write some code and deploy it. Now, traditionally, this is one of the areas that Azure excels in. So, for example, with an in-tier application, I could simply write some code, deploy it to a web app or an Azure function, and it would be running nice and simple. But with Kubernetes, the whole process becomes much, much more complex. Not just from the deployment and how you need to think about how you build and construct the services, but the management of that Kubernetes service itself. So in an attempt to bridge the gap between this increased complexity and developer ease of use, Microsoft created the Managed Azure Kubernetes Service, or AKS. And through AKS, you can now more easily and quickly spin up an entire Kubernetes cluster in minutes. And one of the more complex areas, the management plane, or also known as the Kubernetes API, is abstracted away and completely managed for us. However, AKS only goes so far. Although a lot of that management is handled for us, as a developer, I still need to understand really how Kubernetes works. I still need to understand about service meshes and ingress controls and all sorts of other things. And again, sometimes I just don't want to do that. And so that's when we then come to Azure Container Apps. So Azure Container Apps brings us the full orchestration service, but without that overhead of managing and maintaining a full Kubernetes platform. Now, under the hood, Azure Container Apps actually do run on Kubernetes, but they abstract even more of the complexity away from us than what AKS did. However, with the Azure Container Apps, a lot of the benefits we get are, of course, still there. So we can deploy our containers that we build, these tiny little microservices, into a container apps environment, which provides a natural boundary for many aspects, such as security and networking. The containers themselves can be built on Linux or x86 or x64 images, and they can come from public or private containers. Container apps provide many of the features, like I said, that a Kubernetes cluster does. So, for example, if we want to run different versions of a container, we can do that quite easily, and we can create what's called revisions. So we can have two versions of our app running, an old version and a new version, and we can split the traffic between them. So we could send, say, 20% to the new version and 80% to the old version. And as we become more confident, we can slowly migrate all of the traffic to the new version. This allows us to do rolling upgrades and test our releases before we go full live, or if anything goes wrong, we can very quickly and easily revert back. We can, of course, also scale our individual containers very easily and independently of the other services. We can define the minimum and maximum number of what's called replicas of each container. So that's how many instances we've got running. And quite key, we can even scale these services down to zero. Now, this scaling to zero is great for dev environments because it means as we scale to zero, our costs also go to zero. Now, this is something that's not necessarily automatic in AKS. You can manually switch things off, but this automatic scaling to zero in Container Apps is a great benefit. Now, as a fully managed service, Container Apps integrate well with other Azure services. So, for example, you can optionally use your own virtual networks to better integrate and control the flow of traffic, including using NSG rules or Azure Firewall. We can integrate with Azure Monitor, which collects metrics and data from our containers. So we can easily see the status of the cluster in the Azure portal. And of course, we can use things like log analytics to query the data and generate alerts. From the Azure console, we can even get right into our containers to see the log streams of our apps, or connect to the actual consoles themselves, which aids in troubleshooting when things go wrong. And we can leverage Azure's authentication features. So this allows us to quickly and easily set up authorizations in our apps using the Azure Active Directory and the other providers that feed into that. Whilst we're on security, another great thing of Container Apps is we can use managed identities. Now, what this means is that we can set a managed identity on our Container Apps cluster, and we can use that identity to grant rights to other Azure services, such as storage accounts and key vaults. And this means that using these managed identities, we can connect to these services without having to supply secrets and keys, which is, of course, more secure. Now, when working with AKS and microservices, we often need lots of different additional services, and one of those is how we can control how the services within our cluster communicate with each other. As I said, if we're going for AKS, we've got lots of different options we can do this, but you have to go and install them yourselves. So what Microsoft has done is they've taken one of the leading service meshes called Dapper, and they've built it into the Container App Services. So Dapper is an acronym for Distributed Application Runtime, and it essentially simplifies the authoring of distributed microservice-based apps by providing you a set of APIs, and this allows you to more easily set up and secure communications between our services in a variety of ways. And Docker is just one example of how Microsoft have taken an open source technology and applied it to their own stack. So other areas where they've made choices for us is by using a service called Kida, which manages the event-driven scaling of our services. And another one is something called Envoy, which is used to create edge service proxies. So the point is, with an AKS cluster, we would normally have to choose all these technologies ourselves. With Container Apps, it's all done for us, and it makes things much, much easier to set up and use. Now, what I find useful to really get your head around where Container Apps are in the bigger picture is to understand where they sit in the management, in terms of management and control. So if we think about some of the common terms that we usually use when talking about cloud, on the one hand, we have infrastructure as a service, and on the other hand, we have platform as a service. Now, infrastructure as a service is traditionally thought of as virtual machines, networking, and so on. And at the far end, we could quite easily build our own virtual machines and build Kubernetes on those virtual machines ourselves. But of course, we've got all the management that we need to do that. The benefit is we get much more control, we get much more choice, but the downside is we have to make those choices and do a lot more management. If we look at the far other end of the spectrum, we've got PaaS and serverless, so platform as a service and serverless. And this is where Container Apps sit. So this is completely opposite. We have much less control because a lot of those decisions are made for us. However, we've got far less management that we need to do because the Azure platform just takes care of it for us. And then finally, in the middle of our family, we've got AKS, so Azure Kubernetes Service. Now, like I say, this kind of like sits half and half. On the one side, it sort of sits in the PaaS area in that certain management areas are abstracted away, but there's also a certain amount of management and configuration you can choose to do. So in some ways, that can be the best of both worlds, or, depending on your viewpoint, maybe it's the worst of both. That's Container Apps. Personally, I'm really happy that Microsoft have introduced this service, as it gives us the opportunity to really leverage containerization and microservices and all that other good stuff that comes with all this, without needing to be a Kubernetes expert or needing to worry about things like service meshes and things like that. Okay, so on to the next service I'd like to talk about is a service called Azure Auto Manage. So first of all, Azure Auto Manage is nothing to do with building apps, it's nothing to do with microservices. Instead, it's about managing virtual machines in your estate. Because let's face it, even with some of the amazing PaaS and serverless options we have available to us, some people just can't get away from traditional VMs. And sometimes, especially in migration scenarios, going to virtual machines is one of the first steps you will need to do. So when dealing with virtual machines, there's actually a lot we need to think about, especially if we want to keep them safe, secure, and performing at their best. Azure, of course, has all the tools we need to do all this. We've got boot diagnostics, monitoring, and log analytics to help us investigate or be alerted to issues and go and fix them on our virtual machines. We need to keep our virtual machines up to date and patched. Therefore, in Azure, we can use update management. We could also use configuration management and inventories to make sure our virtual machines are configured and run the software that we allow on them and only what we allow on them. We've got things like Security Center and backups to make sure that they're safe and always backed up so that if anything goes wrong, we can restore to that or that we can be alerted to any issues. Now, each of these services are absolutely great. However, you have to understand them. Okay, you need to understand each of the technologies and how they work. Because of this, you often need to be a bit of an expert in each of them. And so if you're building an environment from scratch, if you're building a new Azure solution, you have to think about all these different components. You need to think about how you're going to configure them all and set them up. Then you need to work out how you're going to onboard your virtual machines to them. And then you need to work out how you're going to continually run them. Now, Microsoft have, of course, been working with thousands of customers for years. And over that time, they've built up quite a library of best practices and advice on how to configure each one of these services to get the best out of them. And combined with this knowledge, they've built the Azure Auto-Manage service. And this takes out a lot of the hard work and hassle involved in having to understand and configure all these services and how we then onboard virtual machines with them. Now, last year I was actually privileged to be involved in a course private program that Microsoft sometimes do, where they invite customers to help them develop these services. So I got to see firsthand this service being developed. And it was really great to see all that come together, how Microsoft looked at all these problems and looked at the complexities that we have when managing virtual machines and figured out how to simplify these things. So that's what Azure Auto-Manage does. It's about bringing together all these best practices into a single easy tool. It's designed to simplify the onboarding and configuration of all those supporting tools. And in the background, when you enable it, it will spin and configure those tools up according to industry standard best practices so that you don't need to worry about it. Now, you can onboard, once you've got the service set up, you can onboard virtual machines individually or in groups or even by group policy. But the key is you choose between either a production environment where all the best practices are automatically enabled for you, or you could choose a dev test environment whereby only certain tools or a subset of those tools. So, for example, in a dev test environment, you don't need backup and monitoring. And of course, if you really want, you can build your own custom profile, whereby you can pick your own options and configure them accordingly. Although, for me, although I see the benefits of being able to do all that configuration, I do feel like it's defeating the point of the service, which is to do a lot of this for you. Now, once set up, Azure Auto-Manage also monitors for drift. So if a virtual machine is disconnected from a service, Auto-Manage can be set to automatically bring that VM back in line and re-register it with that underlying service. Now, it's only available in select regions at the moment: Europe, US, UK, Australia, Japan, and Southeast Asia. But of course, more and more regions are going to be coming on all the time. Now, I've worked on building compliant platforms in Azure, and I know firsthand just how tricky some of these things can be. And I've worked with some clients who just didn't know where to start on their journey when it comes to things like this. And so for me, Azure Auto-Manage is just another great tool to help us get up and running quickly and safely and really getting the benefits out of Azure in the fastest possible time. So, as I said at the start, there's lots of amazing things in Azure, and it's hard to know what to pick. So obviously we've just been through two in a bit more detail. So for the last bit of the session, I'm going to pick a few more services and go through them. The first I wanted to look at was the Azure Firewall update. Now, Azure Firewall has, of course, been around for quite a while. But for those who don't know, it offers a cloud-native option to provide intelligent network security. Now, being cloud-native, it has availability and scalability built in, and this allows you to easily expand your solutions as needed. However, there have been a few missing pieces of functionality here and there, that other third-party firewalls have traditionally provided. And so it's great to see that Microsoft's continual investment in it has meant that these gaps are closing rapidly. So some of the new features that have been recently introduced. The first is intrusion detection and prevention system with signatures lookup, or IDPS. So IDPS helps you monitor network traffic from malicious activities and optionally block it. And it does this by using signatures to rapidly detect an attack by looking for set patterns, such as a specific sequence of bytes that might be used by a particular piece of malware. Now, with the new features, you can now have a lookup facility for those signatures. And if need be, you can go and customize the signatures and apply more fine-tuning that are more specific to your organization's needs. Another new update is TLS inspection with certificate auto-generation. So TLS inspection allows you to monitor encrypted traffic, which is often seen as, in some ways, a security risk, which seems a bit silly, really, because TLS is about protecting the traffic. But if you've got traffic coming in and it's encrypted, you can't see the contents of that data. You can't see the contents of the requests that might contain something malicious. So the TLS inspection service decrypts the packets at the firewall, inspects the traffic itself, and then re-encrypts it before sending it back downstream to the destination. So it kind of gets in the middle. Now, the new auto-generation feature is specifically designed for non-production environments because it allows it to automatically create those certificates that do the encryption for you on the fly, rather than having to go and purchase a new certificate for a dev environment, which of course means it's much more cost effective and it's a lot quicker to be able to test out your end-to-end communication with your application before you employ them to the production service. Finally, on the Azure Firewall updates, we've got the web categories lookup. So web categories is a feature that allows you to deny or allow traffic based on certain categories. So it's a bit like a parent filter, so you can tell it to block out gambling, social media, and more. And this latest update allows you to actually view and manage those individual categories yourself. So that gives you even more control and flexibility over the firewall service. The next service I want to look at is something called Azure SQL Emulator. Now, technically, this isn't necessarily something that's actually in Azure itself, but I wanted to mention it because, again, as an ex-developer, I find it a great tool to be able to test my code against an Azure SQL database, even when I'm disconnected and don't have access to Azure. Now, I used to do some of my development on an Apple Mac, and that meant that I couldn't, for example, go and install SQL Server directly on it. So we needed another way. Luckily, Docker and containerization came, and that allowed Microsoft to build, along with the new Linux version of Microsoft SQL they did, that allowed me to go and spin up my own container on my laptop and actually write my code against that, which was great, but it was quite complex to use, and it could be quite painful to configure. And of course, when there was any updates, I would often have to go back through and set it up again. So anyway, the new tool, which is the Azure SQL Emulator, is basically an extension that you can install on Visual Studio Code, and it basically does all this for you. Once it's installed, you create a project for an Azure database. You can either use an existing database to work from, or you can go from a blank database and start building it from scratch. And then you simply publish that from within VS Code. And when you do that, you actually get prompted whether you want to publish it to an actual Azure SQL database or a logical server, or to an Azure SQL database emulator. When you choose to go for the Azure SQL Database Emulator, the extension goes and pulls the latest Azure SQL Edge Docker image. It configures it for you, and then it runs all your SQL scripts to then generate and build your database for you, all automatically without you having to do any configuration. Now, as well as making it very quick and easy to use, it means you can also integrate it into CI/CD pipelines. And this means that you can build entire environments, including a SQL engine, completely in code. And that then means you can repeat those environments as and when you need. Now, for me, this has been a great addition because, like I say, I was running on a non-Windows laptop and running the Docker engine, and that was fine, but the extension does make things easier. But even if you do know your development on Windows laptop, I would argue that to go and install SQL Express is quite an overhead, especially if you need to regularly rebuild your development environment. So again, this tool just makes things so much easier to get up to speed with a fully functional development environment. So the last update I wanted to share is something called Managed Grafana. So Grafana has actually been a popular monitoring and dashboarding tool, and it has been for a while now, especially with platforms such as Kubernetes. However, like most services that run on a Kubernetes stack, it's got to be installed, it's got to be configured, and you've got to set it all up, and then you've got to do all the ongoing management. But, as I said, it's a very popular tool. So Microsoft decided to introduce Managed Grafana. And this is basically taking this amazing tool and made it an Azure native service. So rather than having to go and install the service yourself on an AKS cluster or on VMs or however you would normally have to do that, you can instead just go in like you would with any other Azure service, tell it to create an Azure, a managed Grafana, and it will go and spin up all the infrastructure you need to have your own fully functional and configured Grafana service. So now with this, we can easily visualize a range of telemetry data in a single set of dashboards. And its extensible architecture means you can actually connect and correlate information from a wide variety of sources, which is often crucial, especially when you need to check on the health or to troubleshoot any application issues that you might have. Of course, now it's a native tool in Azure, which also easily integrates with some of the Azure services, such as Azure Monitor. And in fact, you can even bring in any charts and dashboards you've already got set up in the Azure portal and bring them in to your Grafana instance. From a security perspective, it also integrates with Azure Active Directory. And this allows you to more tightly control which users can actually see which data. Finally, it's also worth mentioning that although you can create your own customer dashboards, out of the box there's actually a bunch of pre-built dashboards that you can use to get you up and running straight away. So again, for me, Grafana has just been a great add-on to the services where Microsoft have taken some of the best open source tools and just made them their own and integrated with them. So that's it for today's brief run through. Apologies, I think I've gone through it a little bit faster than I planned. But as I said at the start, there are constantly new services and new features to existing services coming online all the time. And Microsoft regularly work with partners and customers to develop these. I mean, I could literally spend days just going through some of the latest releases in the past 3 months. So I just wanted to call out a few useful resources, because one of the things that I often used to find a few years ago was, how do you keep on top of all this stuff? How can you be notified of this? So the first of these are the official Microsoft feeds. So the first is azure.microsoft.com/updates. Now, you don't need to read that in the ENUS or anything. You just put /updates and it will take you to your localized version. And this feed is great because it shows you the updates for new features, updated features. It tells you when new features are coming available in your region, when things are going into public preview or general availability. It really is a great source. But there is a lot of information there. And so what I tend to do is I tend to add this feed to my Outlook and just have a check on it every morning because there really is a huge amount of information there. The next one is azure.microsoft.com/blog. Now, this tends to go into more detail around some of the more important services or some of the biggest updates. And again, I found this a really, really useful tool to give you a very quick overview of those new services as and when they come out. And finally, just a little plug of my own. I've got my own sites. I've got my own personal blog at hargreaves.com. I do try and keep it up to date as often as I can. And if anyone's interested in software, I also have a number of Udemy courses at udemy.com/user/Brett Hargreaves, where I talk about all sorts of things from .NET development to Azure and so on. So thank you for your time, everyone. And if there are any questions, now is your opportunity.
Great. Thank you so much, Brett. That was so much good information packed into your session there. And that last slide in particular, I thought was really, really valuable. You mentioned earlier that keeping up with Azure changes can be a bear. And as someone who just covers Azure, not necessarily working with it day to day, it's also a lot to keep track of. So thanks for that. I did want to ask you, while we're gathering questions from our audience, I want to ask you about, the kinds of features. You talked about a lot of the new features that are coming, obviously, but are there Azure container management features or container or management features that you're looking forward to seeing from Microsoft that you haven't seen yet?
For me, it's just taking that entire Kubernetes idea, that ability to run microservices and really simplifying them. As I said, AKS is a great tool. That was a great start at how they did that. And of course, on the other side, they created some other services, such as you had web apps for containers and Azure container instances. But none of them really took the heartache out, shall we say. So I think the cloud apps has been the one I've actually been waiting for and been really looking forward to. So for me, I'm just really excited to see how they're going to develop that further. And even though they've made some choices around some of the technologies they've used within that, I'd be looking forward to seeing them provide the ability to swap some of them out. So, for example, using maybe different service meshes and things, but again, doing it in this cloud-native way whereby it's a configuration choice from a drop-down menu rather than really having to get into the detail of it and understand it all.
Right. Are there some features that you think are super underrated, not talked about enough, or that people really should be paying attention to and can be very useful in a way that's surprising to them?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's sometimes not made enough noise about is some of the networking features that often come about. And a lot of applications by default, they are publicly available, and that's great, but sometimes you need to have much more control over it. So a lot of services, including the new container app service, has this optional VNet integration. And by doing that, it gives you much, much greater control around your flow of traffic. So, for example, with that, if you're especially in a hybrid environment and you want to talk to those container apps securely, you can do it with that VNet integration rather than using the default and going to the public endpoint. And I think sometimes that's not really made enough of.
Right. All right. Let's get on. We do have a couple of audience questions. We'll start with a great one here from Jason. So thank you for that overview. How do Azure Container Services compare to Azure App Services? It seems like there is a good deal of overlap between the two.
Yeah, it's a good point. There is a lot of overlap, but at the end of the day, it's a different service. So it's usually down to developer choice or user choice which they want to use. And that's one of the things that is one of the great things about Azure, and sometimes one of the difficult things. There's often multiple tools that do the same job. So if you're currently using Application Insights, I would say continue using it because it's an amazing tool. If you're new to it or you're coming from a Kubernetes service then and you want to use Grafana because that's what you're used to, then you can now use the Grafana service. So yeah, there is overlap. They're both great, and a lot of the time it's what you're used to.
Great. And then another one here from Carlos. On Azure Data Factory, will there be a way to make comments inside a data flow or pipeline like we can in SSIS?
I must admit, I'm not sure about that at the moment. I'd need to take that offline and get back to you on that.
Sure. Let's see here. Another question from Boris. Does monitoring include Synapse CPU time, number of IOs, and response time?
I believe it does, but again, this is where we're going to really, really deep detail of specific services. So I'd need to double check that and get back to you, but I'm pretty sure it does on the Synapse service, or at least certain aspects of it, because the Synapse service does use VMs under the hood.
Certainly. Right, and then, as you mentioned, these changes, Microsoft can change or add features almost at a daily clip nowadays, it seems like. So that might be something that'll come up in a feature update.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see here. Question from the audience. Everywhere I turn, people are talking about containers. Is this the way to go for everything?
I guess it depends who you ask. I know some people would say absolutely, definitely. Personally, I'd say definitely not. Containerization is a great tool and has a lot of benefits. Because it's just one option in my mind. The other technologies are just as valid. I mean, for example, in Azure, you've got Azure functions that allow you to build very similar serverless microservices that can, again, scale practically to an unlimited number of resources. And again, with Azure functions, Azure manages it all for you. So again, it's a great tool. And before containerization was really that big a thing, lots of people use it, and there's no reason not to continue using that. Sometimes it comes down to, again, prior use of what you're used to. One of the things people sometimes use about using containers is it reduces vendor lock-in. So if you've got a containerized application, you can use it on Azure or any other cloud vendor. So I can sort of see that, but again, I've often said that if you build code well, then you don't necessarily need to get too much vendor lock-in. But even if you do, I've always said you should use the best tool for what you need at that moment in time.
Right. Here's a contentious one. Do Azure Container Apps make AKS redundant?
No. So container apps help people who want to use container in a fully orchestrated environment without the overhead of managing the AKS cluster. Because like I was saying earlier, with AKS you do have to do more management and involvement, and there are, if you're already accustomed to that environment and you're very good at AKS or if your service actually needs to talk to that AKS API, which sometimes you do if you want to take more control, then AKS is still an amazing tool to use. Container apps are just about for the people who maybe want to get started on that journey, or maybe just get into the microservices architecture, but don't want to have to worry about understanding the ins and outs of how AKS work.
Great. Here's another one. Does auto manage mean I don't need any of those services it replaced, like log analytics, change tracking, etc.?
No. So what auto manage is it sets up those services and it sets them up according to best practices. So it still uses those underlying services. And when you go and use auto manage and you run through the widgets to do it, it will actually spin up all these things in the background that you can then go in and again, configure more if you want to. Auto manage, again, it's just about simplifying that process and applying those best practices.
Great. This audience member asks, Grafana looks really cool, but is it replacing Azure Monitor or the Azure Dashboards feature?
Yeah, I suppose this is similar to that, whether it's replacing Insight. And again, no, it's just another tool you can quickly use. And again, like I say, if you're already coming from an environment where you're used to Grafana, if you're moving to Azure from some of the service, then it just means you can now leverage that service because you're more used to it. Again, for me, it's a great example of how Microsoft's commitment to using the best tools in the marketplace. So, no, not replacing it. It's just another option.
Great. We actually have a follow-up question from Boris. He was the one who asked earlier about Azure Synapse. So thanks for answering his question about Synapse monitoring. He can't find a way to analyze CPU utilization, number of IOs, and response time. Do you have any resources to recommend to him? Any direction for him?
I could certainly find it. I could certainly go and find it for you. Obviously, I don't have it to hand right this moment, and if I did, I wouldn't be sure I'd do it in the chat. So I don't know if we can take people's details and get back to them.
Sure. Yeah, Boris, hang in there. We're going to follow up with you after the session. Hopefully we can get you some answers for that. Let's see here. Another audience question for you, Brett. The SQL emulator looks like a nice feature, but does it do everything full-blown SQL does?
No, actually, it doesn't at the moment. It certainly does a lot of what you need to do, but especially as a developer. But there are a few limitations, and certainly one or two could be a killer. I mean, some of the ones it doesn't do. So it doesn't do something called spatial data types. You can't have memory optimized in memory tables. Hierarchy ID data types not there. I must admit, the big ones that are missing for me is full text search and Azure Active Directory integration. So if you want to, in Azure SQL, you can set it up with Azure Active Directory integration and log in using your AD account. You can't do that with this emulator. But again, what I generally do is, it's not often I need some of those advanced functionality, so I would just do my testing, unit testing things against the normal one. And when I need to test full text search, for example, I would do that in maybe a pre-prod environment or a full test environment.
Great. And then Jose asks, could the SQL emulator be used for patch testing?
In theory, yes, because in the background, like I say, it spins up a Linux container running the Linux version of SQL, and because it's a container, you can then go and get onto your container and access it directly. So you could then go and apply patches. Whether it's a good way of doing that, I'm not entirely sure. I'd have said possibly not, but I suppose it would be doable.
Perfect. And we only have a couple of minutes left. I did want to ask you, Brett, since you once again talked about the struggle sometimes of keeping track of Azure changes and Azure updates. A lot of our readers and our audience members here are, concerned about technical debt. Our third session today, in fact, is about technical debt. And a lot of that kind of falls to how well they're able to keep up with just the deluge of Azure updates from Microsoft and making sure that, they're not drowning in information and, really taking in what's relevant to them. What's your advice, if you had to just give one piece of advice to the people listening today for prioritizing Azure features as they come out and making sure that their deployments fit with their particular situation?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. It's something that, I've often thought about. For me, the way I do it is, like you said, sometimes it's just too much. You can't keep on top of it all. I mean, I remember back in the day, to be a Microsoft expert, you basically knew about Windows. That was it. And these days, there's that much. You can't really keep on top of it all. Therefore, it depends on what level you need to keep on top of it all. So if you are, for example, an enterprise architect, just those general update blogs and feeds are a great tool just to keep on top of the general changes and things that are going on. If you're a developer or you're an engineer and you're working with specific technologies, so for example, container apps, then you can just look out for the ones that you have to, just keep on top of those. And through these feeds, actually, you can plug these feeds into RSS feed readers and just filter them down on specific keywords for the areas of interest, which is a great way. A great one I found is using actually Azure Logic apps. I created a link to one of the feeds and made it email me when certain keywords were hit within that feed. So yeah, I'd say pick an area to concentrate on if that's what bothers you, and if you're more, taking the 1,000-foot view, then just go for the general blog feed.
Perfect. Great advice. That's it for our first session. Thank you so much, Brett. Thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in. And stay tuned. We're going to take a very quick break. We'll be back at the top of the hour for our second session of the day called Top Ways Azure Can Transform Enterprises. This one's actually a live panel discussion, so you don't want to miss it. We have a lot of great experts on the line to talk to you about Azure and transforming your workplace into a modern enterprise. So meanwhile, while you wait, take a chance to check out those resources on your console provided by SoftwareOne and Microsoft. And we'll be right back.
Thanks so much. Welcome back, everyone. Thanks again for joining us. And of course, thank you to SoftwareOne and Microsoft for underwriting this summit and allowing us to bring you all of this great content. This is our second session of our Azure and Your Digital Transformation Summit. And this one is a panel discussion called Top Ways Azure Can Transform Enterprises. We have a couple of great experts here to talk to you and answer your questions and just talk about Azure in general and modern workforce. I'd like to welcome Ashley Gary, President and General Manager, North America at SoftwareOne. We also have Jared Cheney, Vice President of Services, North America at SoftwareOne, and David Totten, Chief Technology Officer, U.S. Partners at Microsoft. And of course, I'm Gladys Rama again, moderating, and I'm the editorial director here at redmondmag.com. So hi, everyone. Thanks for taking the time to join our summit today. Get my notes in order. We have a lot to cover, but before we get started, I kind of want to take a feel for the metaphorical room. What is the thing that you're most looking forward to covering during this session? Ashley, let's start with you. I'm just going clockwise on my screen here.
Oh, right. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, loud and clear.
Perfect. Great. Hi, Gladys. Really excited to be here with my esteemed colleagues and partner. I think the most thing I'm excited to tackle today is selfishly to hear from both Jared and David, because it's not oftentimes that I get to pick their brains as well. But really just understanding from the audience too, based off the Q&A and the polls, what some of the biggest challenges are in the space, what the pains are, and then how we can provide more value there in the solution sets that they have at their disposal. So,
right.
Lots to cover.
Yeah. David, how about you?
Yeah, I loved hearing the feedback from the Q&A and the slides that we just saw on where organizations are continuing to transform. It's sort of one of those things, like my quest to stay healthy is sort of never ending. And this digital transformation process is never ending. And you see, at first it's like, how do I take care of infrastructure and how do I think about that? Now it's about app modernization and serverless, and there will be something after this as well. And so I just think it's awesome to sort of hear different perspectives about where customers are in their journey and how we can help them as Microsoft and Software One.
Right. How about you, Jared?
Yeah, echoing a little bit of what you've already heard from Ashley and David, but additionally, just that workload level approach, really looking at the outcomes that businesses are really trying to get to, and then figuring out how to make the technology do what it needs to do to make sure that the business can drive the outcome that they need. That for me is exciting, and I love having dialogue about that.
Perfect. Well, let's just, jump right in. We're coming out of, 2 years and counting of a lot of rapid changes, digitization efforts, a lot of it in the cloud for businesses of all sizes. In your opinion, what has been the effect of this in the cloud and the multi-cloud landscape? Jared, let's start with you.
So I think it's a great question. The last couple of years have really forced a change for a lot of companies on how they approach getting tools in the hands of their own employees as well as their customers. And I think, what we're seeing is there was a bit of maybe quick reaction and quick responsiveness at the early parts of the pandemic to move quickly to get tools in people's hands. They've gone back now and are really trying to revamp what's the best approach, what gives us the best performance, what gives us the best outcome. And, there's a lot of differentiation between what things really need to be closest to the end user, what things can be a bit more abstracted, and then taking that out. Again, means that you have some things that run really well in a hybrid environment, things that have to be close to certain things from a latency perspective, other things where having different cloud approaches for different parts of the solution makes a lot of sense, because it allows for different areas of impact, different edges of that experience for the customer or for the end user within the business. So I think what we see the most is really, again, looking at the workload now, looking at how to run it the most effectively, how to get the most impact for the business out of that workload. And it's creating some very, very dynamic solutions, which stretch obviously between different clouds as well as in hybrid environments.
Great. I'm curious what you've been hearing among your customers and other business owners. Is there a sense that maybe all of it happened a little bit too quickly for them, especially if they're an SMB and now they're trying to rein it in or manage what has, happened or sprung up so quickly in the last couple of years? This is for everybody, just because you've all been speaking to everyone.
Yeah, I can hop in on that. I mean, I'm biased. I don't think you can ever move too fast to the cloud, but I think Jared's point is really important there. There's so many options and there's so many workloads, and now it's about sort of right sizing. And so I think that the more expertise you get, the more opportunity you have to sort of really make sure you're optimizing where your investments are. Obviously, we know that there's incredible scale and security and benefit by honestly, like leasing cloud power as opposed to continuing to configure and buy and manage an on-premise or a current point-in-time technology stack. And we think people made the right investments because they had to. You had to have access to your data and your applications wherever you were working, wherever you were located. That's what the pandemic sort of accelerated in the market. okay, so now that we're there and we're starting to poke around at some of these different technologies, how do we right size that? How do we optimize it? I think Jared's point is the struggle that most companies are facing right now, which is, hey, we know we get benefit here. How are we doing it with the right workloads in the right order, with the right magnitude of scope on what we're managing here locally versus how we're taking advantage of hyperscalers? And so that's the process we're on right now, is optimizing those investments, and the future evaluation, the future investments is, I think, where people are at right now in that cycle.
Right.
Gladys, I'll just add a quick point to that, because I think it's, I like to use this analogy of when you move your house. So what the pandemic caused was, like, essentially everybody had to move, like, overnight, right? And there was no time to take stuff to Goodwill. There was no time to organize your boxes. There was no time to really go about getting the right quotes for all of your moving partners, right, or the trucks that you want to use. There was no time to decide when to move based off of gas prices and flight times, right? None of that planning happened. Basically, companies had to just move tomorrow. And so what happened was they did it as fast as they could with this umbrella insurance from finance saying, don't worry about the costs. We need to keep the business running. And so they moved everything, rightly so, right? And it provided a lot of protection and flexibility to remote workforce and security. But now we're seeing this, like, okay, we moved all of the quote unquote junk that we really shouldn't have moved to, and now we need to go back and clean it up. And so that's kind of this pivot that we're seeing. And at the same time, customers need to go back and clean it up while still innovating. And so it creates this push-pull between where our clients' investments are going. And that's really where we're seeing a lot of value can be provided by the tool sets that Microsoft provides, by the partners and their expertise in this industry. So, yeah.
Great. Yeah, to your point, actually, it seems like what you're describing is a situation where it's like, for good or ill, we're in the cloud now. There's just no turning it back. And now we just have to, whether we were taken there of our own volition, it was like a planned, long-term, years-long process, or it just happened relatively overnight because of the situations that we've found ourselves in. And now we just have to deal with it and seek help for dealing with it. It's really interesting times. So this is, you've heard this question a lot, but I'm just going to put it out into the universe because I think people are still asking it. Cloud versus multi-cloud. What is the benefit of doing multi-cloud when you can just go with a single vendor, make life easier for you, a single point of contact? People find themselves in multi-cloud environments, but, maybe they're perhaps weighing just going with a single vendor. What's the benefit of that?
Well, I won't ask. We won't ask David to answer that question.
By all means.
Yeah, David, what is the benefit of going multi? No, I'm just kidding. I'll chime in on my perspective, and then Jared, please continue to add on. I think it's at the end of the day, and I'm going to speak specifically to the U.S. North American market, primarily the U.S., but because I do think that the cultural approach on how we view growth here in the States is different across some of the other countries globally. So people want choice. That is ingrained in our upbringing in the country, where we want freedom of choice, we want options, and we want to be able to control and choose when we take which paths, right? If you remember, like, those choose your own adventure books that you read as a kid, where it was like, okay, well, we can go down option A. No, I don't like that. Let's try option B. I mean, it's embedded in our thinking from a very young age. And so multi-cloud, it gives our customers that choice. And it doesn't mean that you're locked into one or the other. What we're starting to see is this, as long as financially and operationally they're set up to manage it, this ability to go, between the public cloud platforms, right? And There's certain trends that show certain industries and verticals are more likely to use one or the other, maybe conflict of interest, maybe their customers and their customers, right? So it's this snowball effect. We're really understanding our customers and what they're doing in their business lines might also have an impact on the public cloud platform that they choose. And also the way it connects and communicates with the rest of their infrastructure, right? You're naturally going to have more synergies if you are a Microsoft workplace shop. If you're heavily bought into the value of M365 and all of the added components there, there's a lot of synergies where you should be looking at Azure, right? There's also public sector organizations who use AWS workspaces, right? And so a lot of it is much bigger than just choosing. It's also making sure it aligns with your future growth plans and the synergies of the stack that you're already investing in and what works well for you. Jared, anything else?
I'm jumping. Very diplomatic, Ashley. And listen, we're super biased. I agree with everything she just said. Like, people need choice. We recognize, even as a platform company like we are, we've got to meet customers where they are, and they've got to explore options across the board. We do think that, being sort of the biggest, baddest player in the space gives us an inherent advantage. But, for those of us who met their spouse as the first girl they dated, I commend you, right? But sometimes, you know what I mean? Like, sometimes you got to date people. Sometimes you got to go figure out who's out there, what the market looks like. And we want customers to just think about transforming IT investment, any mechanism possible. Right? And if you're the right catch, eventually all roads lead to you, right? And we know there are some products and solutions that we're not as good at as some of the other market players are. But we believe in the power of the platform and the variety and depth and breadth of our entire service line. So like Ashley said, if you're invested and you're a Microsoft shop, which some people are, it's okay to use 80% of our products and 20% of someone else's. We think you'll still get tremendous benefit and value there. And I will tell you right now, we've had a lot of conversations even this year over it. The best partners for Microsoft and for any hyperscaler are the ones who can effectively go into a customer's environment, ask the right questions, really seek what the outcomes and the benefits the customer's trying to achieve, and then be able to sort of position which product and platform is right for that specific outcome. And this is no longer just, hey, we're a Microsoft partner or we're some sort of another, company's partner. Like, we're trying to figure out what's right for the customer, and it might be a little bit of a jigsaw. It might be a little bit of a random set of solutions that tie together to streamline and make that process the most efficient. One of the sayings I use a lot, which I've received feedback from my team, they want me to stop saying it, is, hey, if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? Like, you can't really go to just like a true Microsoft only partner and be like, hey, give me the right robust recommendation for where my platform is. There's, as much as I'd love to say it, there's no Microsoft platform company on the planet that understands every single outcome a customer's trying to drive from their current IT spend. Now, if the world was 100% Microsoft on-premise, my job would be a lot easier, right? But I've heard about Oracle and SAP and Teradata, and I've heard about other productivity applications, other third-party security vendors. Like, our world of digital transformation products that we have is complex. And so the best partners, and Ashley and Jared have invested a ton here, the best partners sort of get to know the strengths of everybody so that then when they're having a conversation with a client, they can really pinpoint and identify what's the right combination of services and platforms to sort of invest in. And like I said, like, we feel pretty stable. We feel pretty good jobs. We're decent looking. We think we're going to be your lifelong partner for most of the workloads, right? We're okay if you got to sort of, see what's out there before you come on home. So,
Jared, did you want to follow that?
No, I was going to say, echo a lot of what you've already heard. The reality is that, there are dependencies in certain organizations. To David's point, we try to focus on the workloads and really how do we get to the outcome that customer needs. There will often be certain edges of solutions that fit better in different technologies or different platforms. That's where a lot of it comes in. Additionally, you see some customers thinking from a governance, security, risk perspective that they want to hybridize some of that risk out. They want to have disaster recovery in different platforms than in core platforms, et cetera. So there's a lot of different use cases that come to mind, but you've heard some pretty good dialogue there from Ashley and David.
Right. Right. So many virtues to multi-cloud. I noted. But then, of course, management is an issue. A lot of shops are smaller, mom and pop shops. Even if you're a Fortune 500 company, it's a lot to juggle, a lot to manage. We did just come from Brett's presentation where he talked about a lot of the great native tools that are in Azure right now and that Microsoft is rolling out. But at what point does it, do you seek help as a business owner, as a customer? At what point is it time to say, I can't, do this on my own, even with the tools that I have in-house, native tools even?
Ashley,
you want anyone to jump in on that one? Okay. Well, I'll start. Well, I'm a little bit biased because we are a partner, but I would say if you are coming to the point in which you're worried about management, it can sometimes be too late, right? It's not necessarily unfixable, but what we encourage is having a partner to ride, quote unquote, shotgun with you at the very beginning of the journey and do everything you can to keep that consistency there with a partner who understands the cloud space. As David and Jared will talk to more later, is the changes in innovation happen so quick now, and there's no longer these big drops in releases. There's no longer a 6-month warning notice. It's just new features pop up overnight. And if you don't actually have a partner who understands what you're trying to accomplish with cloud adoption and multi-cloud, then you don't have anybody who also can hold you accountable, right, to be able to deliver and capitalize on all the investments that you've already made in the cloud. And I think that's the biggest gap, is it's literally impossible even for us to stay up to speed on anything and everything when it comes to changes and productivity adjustments and innovation life cycles of everything that Microsoft rolls out. It's phenomenal. That's what we want and expect out of them. But that's also why there's a huge partner community to support that. I would also say that there's a different lens that comes from a tech adoption and management to a financial and operational component to managing cloud. And that's the gap that we're SoftwareOne in particular is really pivoting to bridge with our FinOps practice, because what happens is you continue to get invoices for your consumption, no matter which cloud provider you're using, it's all the same. And then the CFO is saying, great, can you tell me how these have been allocated back? Which departments are using them? How are you going to charge this internally? What's been the return? What debt have we gotten rid of to move? And now you have to justify spend that already occurred, right? And so we want the partner and the channel can really help forward plan and manage that for them. So helping them understand what's coming, a forecasting model versus a historical trend analysis, because the spend is already done. What you don't want to happen is you miss your forecast on spend, right? And so that's where we're really seeing the value add when it comes to pulling a partner in, is really understanding those nuances. I would say last but certainly not least, before I ask Jared and David to chime in, is the licensing. The licensing can actually get very, very complicated very, very quickly. And you have everyone out there has already invested in vendors. They already have use rights for whether they're on-prem or in the cloud. And so when you're looking at which cloud provider to go to, oftentimes you'll have complexities where you're double paying for the same workload and you had no idea. You'll have complexities around use rights with Workspace, right? With AWS Workspace and Azure and GCP. You'll also need to know essentially have some certainty on what you're moving when you're moving it, because there's different components based off timing and product term releases. And so while in some form or fashion the licensing has simplified because it's all consumption based, the actual underwriting of that is not. And that is also an area that I would really, really encourage customers to leverage a partner who understands those complexities prior to making long-term investments and commitments on their public cloud contracts. So,
great. Jared or David, anything to add?
No, Ashley, I think Ashley covered it really, really well. I think to just reiterate the point, make sure to bring a partner in for any of those areas where you don't have clarity, where you don't have clear roadmap or a clear path to the governance and risk architecture that you also need to be including. Ashley brought up, the licensing side, which is huge, but also just the actual cost optimization, cost efficiencies, something like a FinOps approach brings to your cloud investment. It's a game changer from what you can do to drive ROI from your business, not just cost optimization.
Right.
Yeah, we just had a leadership summit with Abby Wambach, who, if you're not familiar with her, influential person here in the United States, icon in soccer and our U.S. Olympic teams and Gold Club winning teams. And somebody asked her the question that said, "Hey, tell us, Abby, when you were confident that you had all the skills, all the training, all the fitness that you needed to have to be the best, most dominant sort of striker in the world." And she said, "A day hasn't come yet," right? And she's made the comment. She was like, "If you find a soccer player who feels they're 100% confident in everything they do and they are the best at every single thing that they can apply on the pitch, please introduce me to them. Give me that water." And I feel the same way with our customers. Like, give me the board director, give me the CIO who's 100% confident that they know all the right strings to pull. I want whatever they're drinking, because Ashley made a mention of it. There's just so much that changes all the time. The one thing I don't get tired of, or I guess the one thing I'm never surprised about, is the volume of emails in my inbox or pings on LinkedIn asking for guidance or structure or an approach to evaluating something, right? Because I do think, and everybody who's listening to this is exactly right. They're all saying to themselves, like, yeah, hey, I wish I knew. I feel like 80% confident we're doing the right things, but there's still some things out there I just don't know about. And that's natural. That's where you want it to be. Because if you're 100% confident, what are you doing? You know what I mean? Like, quit your job and go on a speaking tour.
Exactly.
I used to laugh about what Ashley and Jared said about licensing and being complicated and crazy to track. I mean, just to cover it from the journalist's point of view, whenever a licensing story comes up, I always tell someone else to take the story for me, because I would rather not, frankly. So I love that. All right, well, let's talk about containers. We had a previous audience question in the previous session, basically saying everywhere I turn, it's containers all the way down. How do containers explicitly fit into this concept of modernizing your enterprise today, especially in the environment that we described earlier? How do containers and serverless? Jared, how about you start?
Yeah, so it's a great distinction. So, serverless in a broad category allows you to focus on your applications and the services that you want to run without having to really manage the infrastructure underneath it, which is a great abstraction to focus on those core business lines. When you think about containers, some of the benefits that really gives you, and the reason why it's a really key part of this transformation strategy, gives you some portability and some scalability, some efficiency and agility, potentially better or improved security perimeters, right? Because you can control things in a different way. But I think from the app perspective or that workload perspective, it gives you a level of consistency across whatever environments you're running in, to where you can deploy code more consistently, more quickly. You can test more effectively and efficiently. when you think about why that's critical as customers or companies around the world look to modernize or transform how they're doing what they're doing, everything is moving towards automation, right? So everything that we're doing, we're trying to find the most efficient path to outcomes that the customers or that our companies need to drive internally. And containers and serverless architectures in broad category allow us to be more effective, more efficient, and that broad consistency, being able to use the same methodology, the same framework across all of our different environments, and have that level of portability that gives you some of that choice that we talked about before, just inherent in that system.
Right. David or Ashley, do you have anything to add about containers right now?
Yeah. I mean, I think Jared, if you speak my language, I don't want to dork out about this, but I mean, like just the ability to be able to deploy and rapidly connect to different data sets and what you were trying to do with that data, without having to worry about the infrastructure, the security, the integration, sort of makes sense, right? I got a bunch of stuff in my garage. I want access to it. Somebody has to go and organize the garage. Like, why would you want to sign up for that instead of just go use the beach ball that you haven't seen in 3 years, right? Like, so that's how I sort of think about serverless and container scenarios. We actually had a really interesting debate here internally. I call it a debate whenever the executives are just yelling at me over something. In my mind, it's a debate. It's more direction. We have an awesome product called Purview, which is a taxonomy data governance solution. I love it. And if you just started a brand new company, you would adopt Purview because it's that robust, it's that secure, it's that flexible. The problem is like most of the companies that we're working with have probably existed already, and they've got data and taxonomy and governance models all over the place, right? They've got historic legacy on-premises environments. They've got homegrown applications they've created. And so the journey isn't about creating the perfect product. The journey is really about how do we get where customers are into, right, the perfect product. And that's what takes the work. You know what I mean? Like, I would love it if we just were able to stamp a new product and be like, boom, there you go. Congratulations. You now have a data governance solution that will do everything you need to. It takes years of work to migrate data and applications into a space where you can take advantage of the perfect platform, right? And so that's like, Jared gave you all the right reasons on why you'd want to invest, but where do you start, right? That's why this sort of like, phone a friend, call a consultant. Let's get an inventory of what you're doing, so that then we can sort of evaluate what's the right path moving forward. What's the most optimized path? It's like if you were in a big city that you've never been in before, and somebody told you, hey, like you need to go from here to there. You probably pull out a subway map, right? You'd probably figure out on your phone what the right, most optimum directions are. You wouldn't just take a step outside blindfolded and just wander around. You've got to get that consulting-based experience where you sort of do the analysis and figure it out. And we are literally at the tip of the iceberg on app modernization, containers, on serverless. We are at the tip. There's so much work left to do. This isn't going to be one of those scenarios that's solved. Okay, we're officially a serverless economy in transformation and technology. We might be there, when my kids are great-great-grandparents, but it's going to be a journey. And so I guess my one piece of counsel would be, this is a marathon, not a sprint. Take your time, talk to people, get an assessment, pick your workloads, and then strategically plan for where you're going to get the most utility as you migrate toward this future state IT platform. That's
a great point, because I don't think, it's talked about often enough that modernization isn't like an overnight thing. It is a process, as you describe. And if you have a lot of legacy apps, legacy technologies, starting from almost scratch, it can be tedious. And so I guess I'm just curious, like, how long would it typically take, if a partner were to come to a customer and, they want to do top to bottom, like a modernization project, the way Microsoft talks about modernization. What kind of a timeline would you give them? Would you tell them to expect?
Yeah. I'm going to let Ashley and Jared talk about sort of the Software One process, because I think they're probably more geared at it than I would. What I would tell you this, though, is like, remember, 10 years ago, we were explaining to customers how they could leverage more scale, security, reliability, faster time to market by going to infrastructure as a service, right? That was right. So everybody on the call right now is like, hey, Microsoft, you just told me to use the latest version of SQL Server 10 years ago. Now you're telling me to use SQL Server in the cloud. Now you're telling me to use PaaS on my data platform in the cloud. Hey, there will be something after this too, okay? We took an internal poll at Microsoft. We're going to keep building cool stuff, right, to make IT and operations more efficient, to drive customer outcomes more effectively. And so, like, this is a journey, right? You remember there's still a lot of mainframes that exist. I just learned this. I was today years old when I learned there's still 30% of processing, compute, and storage done on mainframes. That's crazy to me, right? We still have a bunch of infrastructure that we're continuing to sort of migrate and modernize over time. And so that's this never-ending journey. Like, Jared, if you've got like I would love to hear Jared's perspective on this. If you have a timeline that you would put, in your will, right, of here's how long it takes for a customer to sort of make that migration journey, sign up for it now for all of our friends and family. Tell us what you think about that question.
Yeah, no, that's a great teaser there, David. The reality is every journey, every timeline looks a little different with every customer. And as you look at what's available now, what's potentially coming in the future, that's part of that roadmap you've got to be paying attention to. David's not wrong. They're going to continue to release new stuff. Probably every, 8 seconds, you're going to see some new microservice or some new feature or something that works better or more effective than what you've got in front of you right now. The reality is that what we try to do when we look at a customer environment with them to start that consultative journey deeper into cloud, into containers, into serverless, or into really that app-led, automation-led transformation, what we're looking at is where's the legacy debt? Where's the technical debt that exists in the business? What are the roadblockers? What are the things that are going to move faster? Where's the maximized value for the customer or the company, for that end user? What are the things that drive the biggest impact on the customer value chain? And I think as you look at those things, then you can start to have some perspective of, okay, these workloads you can move in 6 months, 9 months, 20 months, whatever that number is. That has direct dependencies on these things, that has cascaded or ripple effects that affect these things. So you start to plan out that entire map. And it is, to David's point, it is a journey. It is a long marathon that you have to be prepared for. But there are absolutely things you can target that drive impact fairly quickly in your business. And anything that can remove inefficiencies in the business, whether that's through automation or through removing potential human error, et cetera, those are things that you can certainly target as sort of those quick wins, things that drive quicker value. But then as you look at how you use technology to get different outcomes for your own company, for your own customers, then you start to think about how you're going to take those transformational shifts. And those journeys often are multi-year. They can be quite massive. They can stretch into every aspect of an organization. And then you've got to also think about the governance of that, the risk mitigation, the change, the change management within the organization, the adoption of those technologies. So there's a lot to think about as you start to map that out. But it isn't to say that there aren't quick wins. There absolutely are. But when you think about that wholesale transformation, it is a long journey that companies need to be prepared for.
Great.
Yeah, Jared, and I think, oh, go ahead, Ashley.
I was just going to say, I also think, Gladys, it's interesting because what I know, Jared, I think it can be like, well, it depends. This is a very common answer in the tech world because it really does depend. But I do think that organizations need to choose the role that technology plays in their business. And that fundamentally will change how quickly they can move on certain things like this. And it's totally fair. We see it with the industry verticals where you have, higher tech who has fundamentally, like, tech is part of their product. So therefore, it has a different level of sponsorship. It has a different level of empowerment and spend and authority matrix and governance, right? And so they set up a framework where when these projects become urgent, they can quickly move them up to the top of the list and they can launch them. That timeline is very different than maybe an organization in manufacturing who is moving off of mainframe and has historically viewed technology to run the business versus maybe necessarily innovate or drive. And so it really comes down to from our standpoint is understanding what our customers, where they view tech, where it sits as an investment, the sponsorship it has, and then that really gauges how quickly they can move on some of these more front of, fancy or leading edge changes that come down, and every business we see is different across the board here.
Great. Let's talk about automation for a bit. Obviously critical to kind of a key tenet of what we call modernization now. Ashley, I'm wondering if in your experience, if you've seen, a customer, even another partner, solve like a real world problem with automation and, how they went about it. Just curious to see what kind of, real world examples that we can give to people who are listening in who are probably still kind of dipping their toes into this technology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm actually going to give this one to Jared. Jared, I think the first thing that comes to mind was during the pandemic, we had a couple customers who immediately came to us, to flip a lot of their infrastructure and build automation right from the beginning because they had to move to an app-based for their employees. I don't know if you want to expand on some of those.
Absolutely. I think, one of the great ones that we got to be a part of with a customer was taking a look at, they suddenly had to change the way their entire supply chain functioned. They were part of supply chain for certain customers. They were obviously had their own supply chain. And now suddenly they don't have people in their warehouses every day. They don't have people in the physical locations that they used to have. And so they had to really automate a lot of the workflows, a lot of the integrations between systems that used to have manual transactions or have manual push-pull operations. So building some of that systems integration was really critical for them to be able to automate and gain those efficiencies of their own supply chain. But then beyond that, being able to change the way that they actually interacted with their customer base, with their suppliers. So building system portals, tying in APIs together, and then some of that automated workflow. So you start to see some of those things like, the IPA and RPA type work really taking advantage of those urgencies that were created, as you said, Ashley, by the pandemic, because they had to move fast. And this was fundamental because now suddenly they still had, workers, critical frontline workers that had to have the things they needed, that needed to be able to deliver and supply several different industries. But they had to do it in a way that was just fundamentally different. It meant, changing some of the tooling on the front end, back end. It meant automating workspace, that environment where people could interact with the systems had to change. So there's an opportunity to find a lot of efficiencies. What was great is, as an outcome of that, we've seen in commentary and feedback survey work with them, very high increase in productivity in certain things that they had never even really looked at as lacking optimization in the past, right? They were working, it worked fine, but as that demand for urgency changed, that demand for efficiency level changed, and so automation was able to drive a lot of that from an outcome perspective with them.
Great.
I realize I'm treading on becoming like an actual real parent of my children when I was driving my 5th grader off to camp and I made a comment to him and I said, hey, what's the most valuable asset you have, right? And the answer for my kids is kindness, by the way, because they're jerks. But okay, so kindness, okay? And Parker looked me dead in the eye and he said, time. And I said, okay, bro, you're spending too much time listening to me and the other adults in your life. think about, your heart and your spirit, right? And your encouragement being what you have to offer the world. Automation to us, right? And this sort of ties back into what we just talked about. This is sort of like, of course, right? Because we have the reps. Jared and I have spent, and Ashley, we spent enough time with customers and partners we know, we've seen it, we've seen the playbook, we know where there's quick wins, we know where we can make you more efficient, we know where we can make your people happier at what they do, right? Just by figuring out how to do the remedial tasks in a lot more efficient and utilitarian way. And so, like, for us, it sort of is just like, well, of course, right? Like, what else are you doing? From a customer's perspective, though, I have a lot of empathy because you don't know. You don't realize, what would you do if you had 30% more productivity from your sales team? What would you do if your, marketers spent 50% less time combing through data and trying to figure out how to target customers with a campaign, instead just actually designed, developed, landed campaigns? Like, what would that do to your bottom line? Like, so for us, there's a lot of just IT management tasks and processes that we've already solved, and yet most customers don't necessarily have exposure to. And so I think for us, when I think about automation, I sometimes have to sort of slow down and be like, whoa, I'm sort of spoiled. I get access to all these user scenarios. I mean, Jared gave you a couple of good customer examples, but across the board, I haven't found one customer yet who's like, yeah, that automation thing really slowed us down, like made us less impactful, like increased, really hurt our P&L. I haven't found one yet. Most customers just don't really have an understanding of what's possible. And again, back to that journey, there's quick wins here that we can drive, return and utilization of your IT spend differently to drive outcomes that you don't even know about yet. So that's when I think about automation, I think about the great unknown, the untapped potential that exists, because you guys don't have the luxury like we do of talking to so many different customers and partners.
Right. We're going to turn to security. This is a perennial bugbear of IT, a great favorite topic of our audience and our readers, and zero trust security in particular. This is a basic question, but I think it's helpful for us to define terms. What are the tenets of zero trust that make it zero trust compared to how IT has generally, approached security before? And how does this fit into the concept of a modern workplace? Especially now, there's exponentially more endpoints to secure than there ever were before. Let's just talk about zero trust. I'll throw it back to you, David, since you're top on my screen.
I was hoping to give Jared a quiz on this one. Zero trust is, as I effectively call it within my organization and the span of control I have, is just healthy paranoia. How about that, right? Healthy paranoia and understanding that threat vectors can be anywhere at any point in time. And the principles we have is go down to the lowest molecule, which we believe is identity. Who's trying to access your data, what application? It could be a person, it could be a thing, it could be a process. What's trying to access your information for what purpose, right? So that's the first principle. It's down to the identity layer, right? The second principle is just inherent distrust. You have to be very purposeful in understanding that any ask for data, applications access, inherently you have to block, okay? And then you have to validate once you're in there. So it's a little bit more of a closed door mechanism where get the ask internal, then run your process to make sure you evaluate it. And then the third thing is effectively, understanding that threat vectors are in your organization no matter what. They're there. So if you're sort of one of these people that's like, I've got the greatest Fort Knox possible, listen, somebody's got the blueprints. Somebody's already in there. Somebody's already poking around. Somebody's trying to create some mechanism to get access to your information. Might not be in your first party infrastructure. It could be within your supply chain. It could be within your customer relationship software. It could be, in the third party, application you might be using. And so just understand that threat vectors are there. Assume you've already been breached. So now you have the right process, governance, failover, backup process in place. So those are sort of the three tenets of zero trust. What's been a unique shift in IT, and Ashley and Jared, I'd love your perspective on this. Again, I'm obviously biased. Is it's not product based anymore. It's more process and governance based more so than anything else, right? Because now the IT landscape, again, if I had my wish, it'd be all Microsoft products, all Microsoft Fabric. I'm told that's not the case in every customer. And so with it not being something that we can completely control within our, platform, well, how do we make sure that customers' environments are safe and integrated and secure? And it is really more about the philosophy and the foundations of those principles across the different IT products and vendors and processes and applications and databases that's sort of critical to implement. And so, when you get the call that says, hey, can I buy a Zero Trust product? Hey, just FYI, we will sell you something. Okay, Mike, I promise. On behalf of Microsoft and our board, we will sell you something. But will that solve your problem? Will you rest, easy at night knowing that now I'm zero trust security model? Probably not. So Jared, Ashley, I'd love to turn it over to you for your perspective on that, on the principles and the process itself.
I'd love to, echo a little bit of what you're saying. I think what's been interesting and, background-wise, I spent a lot of time in networking, telecom, et cetera, early career. And you used to have this philosophy that there was a perimeter, right? And there was a trusted inside, and the rest of the world you didn't trust. And that is gone, right? Especially with cloud, with the movement over the last several years, as we've really stretched that there is no perimeter anymore. It's all permeable. And to your point, David, you don't always know who's in your environment or who's not in your environment. And so this is absolutely a philosophy that you have to adopt inside of your organization. But it's just like security has always been. It's about people and risk management. It's about having the right controls, the right processes in place. David already hit on the fact that you've got to have this base layer identity always validated at every step, right? We don't trust that just because 5 seconds ago you were this person, that you're still that person, because we need to make sure that we're checking against that credential, we're checking against that location based, all of the different controls that we can use to validate that you are who you say you are on the network, or that your service or process is who it says it is, and that it's functioning as we expect. So I love your statement, the healthy paranoia, because I think that resonates, especially, we've had lots of these conversations with customers in the very recent history here, as they come to grips with how expanded their footprint is now. Where they actually transact now is everywhere. And so that ability to really change the way you build your accountability inside of your governance and controls, that you are actually no longer just trusting but verifying, but you're actually validating everything at every step, so that you can make sure that, to the extent possible, you can compartmentalize any risks or compartmentalize any damage, because there's micro perimeters everywhere now because of those controls that you build.
Right. David, I do like your point about how Zero Trust isn't something that you buy. It's not solvable by a product or a product line necessarily. And I think that's something that a lot of companies that can have trouble wrapping their mind around. They can't attack it the same way that they would attack a lot of other problems. And I kind of wondering how that ties into Microsoft's modern workplace vision. The words modern workplace comes up a lot in Microsoft's literature and it's marketing materials. It also does seem like philosophy driven, not necessarily product driven. How do you go about hammering home the point to customers or to the people, to the audience who are listening, that these things are important? Zero Trust is important. Marketplace is important. When these aren't like tangible things that you buy, these are kind of culture changes and philosophy changes. Anyone, by the way.
Yeah. I mean, from my experience, customers aren't dumb, right? They sort of understand it. They know they've got to protect their assets. They know they've got to protect their people. They know they've got to make sure that their people can be as productive as they can be with access to critical information to make them smarter, better, more efficient at their jobs than they ever have been before. So just like run off the common human decency approach of, hey, like, we're trying to be the best we possibly can be, and we got a lot to risk if we don't do it correctly. So let's just, if we start there as a baseline, everything else sort of can fall into place, right? Microsoft has significantly shifted our approach, potentially coincidentally with Mr. Nadella taking over, to having a little bit more of an open ecosystem of integrations and partnerships, and making sure that we become not only the best product company, like Teams, we think is an incredible product for IM, videos, meetings, document, co-authoring. We love Teams. We want it to be your desktop of the future, right? It's not just the product, though. We also want it to be the platform, the collection of services that integrates both your back end to your front end, your information worker to your frontline workers, your factory workers to your supply chain. And so modern work as a philosophy is about, how do I, as a person who literally gets paid to do a job, any company in the world, how am I better, more efficient, more equipped, more educated to make better decisions faster, more efficiently, right? So that I can go home and coach T-ball. I mean, it's literally that simple. And so having a modern work is making sure that you're taking advantage of technology innovation to be better at your job, so that you can focus the most valuable asset you have, next to kindness, of time in a more effective and appropriate manner. And so for us, it's a collection of products, but it's more a collection of services and a collection of processes that a user has access to make sure that they can be pretty good at their job. Now, that's intentionally vague because our mission statement is to make sure that the entire planet, right, achieves their full potential. And that's how we believe you can do it with technology. We think technology can make the world a better place. And so if you think about the modern workplace just being am I taking advantage of the right process, tools, infrastructure, IT innovation to be better? Like, that's a pretty grandiose statement, and that's what modern workplace entails.
Right. Ashley, what do you think? I'm curious, from your experience, how you've gone about approaching this with other partners, other customers.
Yeah, we have spent actually a lot of time at the end of last year reevaluating our modern workplace strategy because of the hybrid workforce. So what has resulted out of the pandemic is not just hey, we all need to be able to work anywhere, everywhere. It's also eliminating the noise that a human consumes now on a daily basis. I mean, I'm sitting here, I have my cell phone right here, right? I have landscapers outside. I have a dog. I have my email that comes in at 100 miles an hour on a daily basis. I get pings on Teams, right? And I get pings in my CRM system. I get notifications on WhatsApp. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And so we have really taken a step back and said, okay, we know the tools are out there. They're phenomenal. There is no question that Teams is a modernized platform that is designed for purpose. However, as a human who now works half at my home, half in my car, half in an office, half on an airplane, what in Teams is the best use of my time? Do I need to know all of them? When should I open up Teams? Should it open up so it's customized for my role as a president of sales? But then you have your individual sellers and you have your engineers. Like, their application adoption will look different. And so now we're seeing this, okay, let's take tech, but then let's rework it so that the user interface and the interaction for us as people is easier, it's less noisy, and it's designed for your role. And making your environment a happy one and not one that's overwhelming and causes employee burnout. And so we've taken this like human touch element around polling employee sat surveys, right? You know how much comments come in from an employee satisfaction survey around burnout? And naturally it's, okay, well, is it really burnout, or is it because you are now working in a brand new environment, so to speak? You don't have somebody next to you to necessarily help you on things, and it's overwhelming. And so when you pull back some of these layers, we've taken this modern workplace and really adapted it so that it's easier to consume for our customers customers, which is their employees in their organization, right? Which goes to the adoption, the change management, the psychological impacts of using new tech for your own benefit and not just because somebody tells you to do it. So the beautiful thing is that Microsoft has an amazing stack. It's all there, but where a partner comes in is like kind of whittling it down to make sure it's really, really beneficial for the company and the role and the person, depending on where they're working and how they're working.
Right. That question about burnout, I think it's especially relevant now, considering the hiring environment, the job environment that we're in. Really important, really timely. And we're running low-ish on time, but I want to make sure I get this question in. I want to do a lightning round. What's the big takeaway that you want to leave our audience with when it comes to modernizing with Azure? Jared, how about you start?
Sure. I think probably the biggest takeaway for me is think about the workloads, think about the impact of those workloads and that business outcome. What are we trying to accomplish? What are we driving? And then work backwards. Recognize that it's part of a journey. It's every part of that puzzle, as you've heard, is connected. There's interconnectivity everywhere, but you can focus on areas where you can make some maximum impact very quickly if you're targeted around those applications and the work and the business need that delivers.
Right. Ashley, how about you?
I would say make sure you have a partner in crime, literally, to help you understand the landscape, the industry, the ecosystem, and brings perspective on what to use, where to use it, and how to use it and adopt it, and then have a plan on managing it.
Great. And finally, David?
Yeah, love everything that Jared and Ashley just said. I mean, one, Microsoft wants to be your long-wedded partner in life. And we think SoftwareOne's the best partner that can help you make those decisions and prioritization, obviously. But the second thing is, don't get nervous where you are. Everybody is in a different space, and understand it's a marathon, not a sprint. And you can pick wins through the process. So nobody's got it perfect. Nobody's got it right. Nobody's done this better than anybody else over the past sort of 20 years. So wherever you are, there's a home for you. There's a project for you. There's an assessment for you. And there's a journey to be had. So don't get nervous about it. Just make sure that you're taking the right process to engage a partner and a platform to help you make sure you reach your outcomes. Perfect.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody. Ashley, Jared, and David, for taking the time. I'm so glad we could do this in person, more or less. Really, really appreciate it.